In the land of Skyrim, there are 10 different races we can play as. From the brooding Dark Elves of Morrowind, to the chivalrous Bretons of High Rock, to even the sneaky Khajiit of Elsewhere. Naturally, players will often hold one of these races close to their heart and form a sort of attachment to them, including myself, believe it or not. Perhaps you like their in-game stats, maybe you relate to them more physically or culturally. Or you may favor a certain race because their lore is expansive, intriguing, and based as fuck. Hello my fellow hirelings of House Telvanni. I'm Neloth, and today I'm going to be ranking each of the races of Skyrim based on their lore, and their aesthetics as well. This should go without saying, but this video is solely my opinion and will be quite subjective, and I'm sure everyone's ranking would be different than mine for a multitude of different reasons. So just because there's a certain race in last place does not mean I absolutely hate them. I'm only making this video for the money anyways, because skooma ain't gonna buy itself. So with all that being said, let us race right into the video. Consuming last place are the Bosmer, better known as the Wood Elves. The short, tree-hugging archers that make their home in the rainforest province of Valenwood. Now, I know that stealth archers and green-packed freaks everywhere are gonna 360 no-scope my ass the second I step outside my mushroom tower, but I'm simply not the greatest fan of their lore, nor do I enjoy druids and wood elves from any genre of fantasy, really. But I do freely admit that they take many aspects of wood elves from generic fantasy and take them in a far darker and more interesting direction. But I mostly have one problem when it comes to these freaky little twinks, and it's that I don't really like many aspects of the Green Pact, mostly dealing with not being allowed to quote-unquote harm nature at all. And if you do, you are damned to the ooze or purgatory till the end of time. Meaning if you have a child who's deathly ill and you pluck some leaves in order to fashion a cure, or Boethia forbid, eat a fucking apple, the forests of Valenwood are going to hunt you down no matter what and execute you, and then your soul is going to live aimlessly in the ooze, never to know Aetherius, which is the Elder Scrolls version of heaven. I just find this to be silly since this is a pact that many Bosmer in Valenwood have to adhere to, even though their ancestors signed it and not them. But for some reason, not all Bosmer adhere to the pact, like the Vine Dusk Rangers who don't give a damn, which I do respect, but it makes you wonder, are they damned to the ooze? I also hate how in ESO, with the exception of the Vine Dusk Rangers, many people who defy the Green Pact are portrayed as evil and morally wrong, which I find to be very annoying. I will say though, I don't hate the Green Pact completely, as I do find the cannibalism to be really cool. Not being allowed to let any aspect of a kill go to waste, be it an animal or a person, which is why many Bosmer try to be friendly with outsiders and use violence as a last resort. Even though some Bosmer get really angry and threaten people's lives who simply don't know they are violating the Green Pact in the first place. In Oblivion and Morrowind, I actually like how the male Bosmer look and sound like goofy little alien twinks while the women look like badass warriors. But I don't like how almost all positions of power in Valenwood are held by men, including the Sylvanar and Monarch. There is the Green Lady, who's the contrast to the Sylvanar, but she doesn't have political influence. She's just an extremely strong primal hunter that serves as a representation of the Bosmer physically. Personally, I would have found it cooler if Valenwood was a more matriarchal society that looked down upon its men, as that would be more unique and alien and lead to more interesting storytelling. Now, that isn't to say that the Bosmer are all bad, as I do find their architecture to be fascinating, especially the Elden Tree, which I could look at for hours, and the Walking Tree of Falinesti is extremely cool. There is also the Wild Hunt, where Bosmer can undertake a ritual to transform into beasts and incomprehensible entities in order to defend their forests. And after killing their opponents, they will turn on each each other in, quote, cannibalistic orgies. That's the kind of crazy alien shit I like in the Elder Scrolls, but still, I'm just not a fan of tree-hugging civilizations in fantasy. But I can completely understand why most people would rank them much higher. This is just more of a me thing. Questing into 9th place are the Bretons, a hybrid race living in High Rock that has human and elven ancestry, making them the Elder Scrolls equivalent of the half-elves you see in generic fantasy. Now, the reason why the Bretons are placed here is because they are the most generic of the races when it comes to their lore, as they are the Knights of Yore feudalist society guys. Aside from their origins of the Dureni elves intermingling with the humans they enslaved called Needs, which eventually gave way to the Bretons. The Bretons simply don't have a lot of strange foreign lore, which is what separates the Elder Scrolls from other fantasy genres. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, as I think it's useful to have a race of humans with a lot of generic medieval Western themes as a gateway that leads to more of the interesting aspects of the Elder Scrolls lore. But still, compared to some of the other guys on this list, they just aren't that cool. The gods of the Bretons are also extremely generic, just being a combination of the gods in the Imperial pantheon and Elven pantheon. The sole unique aspect of their pantheon is their inclusion of saints, who were Bretons that performed great deeds, but then again, other races have also done this, but better. Also, I never really understood why Bretons, who are constantly said to have a deep connection with magic, are always seen as militaristic knights and soldiers that use normal weapons. Like, I know many Bretons become mages like Hannibal Traven in Oblivion, but there should be a lot more mage-like factions than there are knightly orders in High Rock. Again, I don't hate the Bretons, and I do like their knightly orders, more so in High Isle, to be quite interesting. And much of their philosophy works well for newer players to the Elder Scrolls series, like their obsession with completing quests and deeds for glory and the opportunity to become nobles. And the Breton proverb, "Find a new hill, become a king," is a really badass line. It also helps that the Bretons always have some of the best racial passives in all of the Elder Scrolls games, but I'm not taking that into account as this video is focused on their lore. I should also note that there are also the Reachmen in the Elder Scrolls that technically classify as Bretons, but they are seen by and large as a completely different race and culture, which is why I'm not taking them into account when ranking the Bretons. Divining into 8th place are the Altmer, better known as the High Elves, the tall, golden-skinned, hoity-toity, magically gifted elves that make their home in the Somerset Isles. Now, I've never been the biggest fan of the Altmer, and it has nothing to do with the Thalmor and the oppressive Aldmeri Dominion in Skyrim. If anything, that makes them much more interesting. But they unfortunately suffer from the same shallow river as the Bretons, and that's the fact that they feel like generic elves you would see in any other fantasy game. Magically gifted elder beings that think they are the greatest and deserving of admiration and look down on every other race on the planet, even many of their own kind, striving for perfection. Now, in some cases, Altmer lore is actually really cool and leads to some interesting storytelling, like with the Hulkened, deformed Altmer that are seen as impure and are either put to death as infants or treated lesser than second-class citizens. Or with the Thalmor, who seek to dominate the entirety of Tamriel and perhaps even erase all of man from existence, and find a way to rise to godhood so they can be one with their ancestors once again. And even the Sigic Order, mage monks that disagreed with Altmer philosophy and fled to their Isle of Artaeum, where they isolate themselves, which is ironic given how isolated Somerset already is. But that's really where my compliments for the High Elves end, as everything else surrounding them is honestly just boring. I think my biggest critique is that I don't really like the architectural style we see in ESO, as it feels far too gothic, which I feel goes against how Alinor is described in the Pocket Guide to the Empire, where the city is made from glass and insect wings. It would have been far more interesting if Somerset, instead of being made out of marble white, was instead green, similar to glass armor, and had the feel of the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz. I've also never never been the biggest fan of the elven armor, aside from the Welkind armor in ESO with its griffin wings, as they just seem very blah and not magical or divine enough. Excluding ESO, I don't think I've ever even played as a high elf either, as I've always had more interesting ideas with other races. And I think it's because it's simply not as fun to play a high elf compared to the other races, especially one that tries to encapsulate Altmer culture. Now we have exited the bottom 3 races and entering the more middle of the road races, those I generally like but don't have the oomph like some of the other races. Sapping into 7th place are the Saxleel, or Argonians, the humanoid lizards that make their home in the swamp province of Blackmarsh. Argonians are interesting because you either love to love them or love to hate them, especially if you're fond of another particular race of elves. And to be fair, playing as a lizard is pretty cool, and I say that as someone who's played as a dragonborn on the few occasions I've played Baldur's Gate 3. And as someone who has a pet reptile of his own named Stoa. Isn't she so cute? But when you look at the lore of the Argonians objectively, they're very just meh. I think one of my biggest problems with the Argonians is how they feel like more of a hive mind rather than a race of individual persons. All entirely devoted to Sithis and the Hist trees and will always answer its call. And the Argonians have very few factions or cultural differences between each other besides some very specific examples. Like the Sul-Zan tribe who worship Mehrunes Dagon instead of Sithis. Also, this video is already chocked full of hot takes, so fuck it, I'll just say it. I find the shadow scales to be extremely overrated. But this is because we have never truly seen them on full display, nor do we have any information on the Argonian kings that supposedly use the shadow scales. And we probably never will, given that the shadow scales are supposedly extinct by the 4th era. The religion of the Argonians is also not particularly my thing, as they venerate their local history and Sithis, whom even the Hists acknowledge. But aside from Sithis being the manifestation of constant change and the Argonians' philosophy of always being in the here and now and not the past, their pantheon, so to speak, isn't really that engaging for me. Additionally, the province of Blackmarsh itself is probably my least favorite in the Elder Scrolls because it's just swamplands, which is the bane of every Souls player's existence. Or so I assume. I've never actually played the games beyond Elden Ring. The land is so inhospitable that the other races can't really reside in the province for long, especially the further inward you go, as Fetcher flies will slowly eat their flesh off. Meaning the idea of a mainline Elder Scrolls game in Blackmarsh is extremely unlikely, which I'm okay with. Now, we are talking about the race and not the land, but their atmosphere has to count for something. Even then, I still really love the look and feel of the Argonians, except for OG Oblivion, because by Sithis they were ugly. I'm also a fan of both their modern architecture with mud huts and reed houses, and their old architecture with Zanmirs, which have a really cool Aztec theme to them. Some people make fun of the Argonian mud huts, saying they look like literal piles of shit, and my response is, cool. I think that's interesting and funny. They also have many weird and obscure aspects about them, like using frogs and musical instruments and using the bones of relatives for armor, which I find to be really badass. And of course, there's how the Argonians proved themselves during the Oblivion Crisis, with fucking up the Daedra so hard and charging into their portals so much, putting the champion of Cyrodiil to shame, that Mehrunes Dagon had to close every portal in Blackmarsh. Something no other province could accomplish, all thanks to the Hist trees calling many Argonians back to Blackmarsh. Which is cool, but it does reinforce my disdain for hive mind races. Berserking into 6th place are the Orcs, the pariah folk that live all over Tamriel in either strongholds or their city of Orsinium. I actually like the Orcs a lot. They look super badass in every game, excluding the Oblivion remaster where they just look more like toads than anything else. I also really love clans and factions with defining aesthetics, and ESO really expanded on the Orcs and included many unique clans like the Morkel clan, known for their smiths and builders, or some more obscure clans like Clan Lucen, known as the Wolf Clan, that conduct terrifying night raids and were experts at moving through the night and ambushing enemies. The duality of their pantheon is also really interesting and was the highlight of the Orsinium DLC, the Adric god Trinimac and the Daedric prince Malakath, and the orcs disputing over which god was not only real, but which one was more effective at uniting the orcs under one strong civilization. One strong Orsinium. Speaking of which, I love the concept of Orsinium, but Orsinium is also one of the problems I have with the orcs. See, as much as I like the orcs and their harsh lifestyle and always being the outsider in most places, it's also difficult to take them as seriously as the other races, because of the fact that their promised land of Orsinium has been sacked like 4 or 5 times, and the orcs always get their asses handed to them constantly. Like, I understand why the orcs would get owned by the sword-obsessed Redguards, but also by the Breton twinks as well? Seriously? Hopefully in The Elder Scrolls 6, we can expand on the Orsinium orcs exponentially and see how their new city is doing and do deeds and quests for them as well. Maybe even buy a home there and marry an orc wife and adopt orc kids. I do hate how Gortwog's Orsinium in Daggerfall was razed to the ground in the Elder Scrolls book Lord of Souls, mostly because I'm tired of always seeing it fail every 5 seconds. I want the orcs to truly have a kingdom and land similar to literally every other race, because if not, I'm always going to collectively view them as losers. Even more so than the Argonians, who get enslaved every 5 seconds. I love the orcs a lot from their aesthetic, unique stronghold culture, pantheon, and general lore, but Orsinium constantly failing holds them back a lot. Colonizing 5th place are the Imperials, the Roman LARPing humans that control the center of Cyrodiil. Now, I'm going to say something quite embarrassing, given that my entire identity is a dark elf that's part of a faction that hates the Imperials. I believe I have played as an Imperial more than any other race in the Elder Scrolls. The first Skyrim character I remember was an Imperial named Ramir Wellen, my first Oblivion character was an Imperial named Octavius, and my first character I beat Morrowind with was an Imperial named Flavius Florentius. Not only that, but the character I have played the most in the Elder Scrolls Online until I transferred over to PC was an Imperial Arcanist named Corvus Hanata, a character that was inspired by Fudge Muppet's Remanite build. Needless to say, the Imperials hold a special place in my heart, and because they are so connected with all the other races and provinces in the Elder Scrolls, it makes playing them some of the most fun from a role-playing perspective, especially a die-hard Imperial loyalist with ties to the Imperials' more obscure lore. And I have only grown to love the Imperials more when looking at the super obscure aspects about them, like with the books Remanada and Shaniet, how Reman Cyrodiil was born after some freaky king made love to a hillock, and 2 Dibellan disciples named Shaniet and Sediena found baby Reman crying on the hill months later and then marched him to the Ruby Throne and sat him there with no one objecting. Oh, and the Amulet of Kings that is essential in Oblivion was once imbued in the forehead of Reman. I also love the Elysian Order and their subsect, the Marukati Selective, and their doctrines that were written by a monkey man who wrote it using his own blood. Simply put, Imperial lore goes fucking hard and crazy. And I haven't even mentioned the various empires conquering all of Tamriel, with Tiber Septim being the first to conquer them all and ascend to divinity. Now, I'm talking a really big game about the Imperials, but if they are so cool, why am I placing them in the middle of the road? Well, I have one answer. Oblivion. See, I love the story of Oblivion a lot, but the game unfortunately took all the cool lore that was introduced in Morrowind and put it to the side, in favor of emulating Lord of the Rings, which was super popular at the time. The idea that Cyrodiil was a jungle with dragons was sort of retconned, and I bet you didn't even know that the Imperials have 3 distinct cultures. The Heartlanders that live in or near the Imperial City and have the Roman aesthetic we see all the time, the Colovians Argonians in western Cyrodiil and are similar to the Nords in many ways and are hardened woodsmen that have an interesting Russian aesthetic to them. And the Nibonese who live in eastern Cyrodiil, who are my personal favorite, that are more magically gifted and wear colorful robes and adorn themselves with unique face markings, and worship more gods than grains of sand in the Alakir Desert. These unique cultures of the Imperials are almost never seen, and I wouldn't even be surprised if you're hearing about this for the first time. If we actually got to see these cool aspects of Imperial culture on display, they would easily be number 2 in my opinion, but they aren't, and Bethesda has insisted on making them Roman LARPers, which I feel mitigates their weirdness. Now we are entering the top tier category of races in the Elder Scrolls, those I genuinely adore the lore of and think they are near perfect. Swinging into 4th place are the Redguards, the sword-obsessed humans that live in the province of Hammerfell. Redguards are without a doubt the most underrated race in the Elder Scrolls and do not get the recognition they deserve, as many people don't know about their lore. But hopefully the Elder Scrolls 6 will expand on the lore of the Redguards in a positive way and show off how awesome they truly are. But why are they so awesome? Well, there are a couple reasons for this. First is their literal obsession with swords. Curved swords. And a desire for perfection that borders on complete insanity. Just listen to the words of Rada al-Saran.
In my youth, I dedicated my life to perfection. In art, perfection. In love, perfection. In war, especially in war, perfection. To attain glory in Yokuda, nothing less would do. Beyond the Sea of Pearls, peerless sword masters were as common as grains of sand. Even the grandest victories felt commonplace. In a land of heroes, how can anyone claim to be exceptional?
So if you ever want to play a completionist character with a desire to max all your stats, Redguards are actually quite fitting. Many Redguards study the thousands of various sword techniques in what is referred to as the Way of the Sword, with sword singers being the best of the Redguard swordsmen, and the Ansei, or Saints of the Sword, being the best of the sword singers. So great they were that the Ansei had the ability to manifest a sword from their very soul, which is called a Shihai, or spirit sword. In fact, the obsession with swords is how the Yokudans, who were the progenitors to the Redguards, lost their ancient homeland of Yokuda. Lore holds that the entire continent of Yokuda sunk into the sea because a group of rebellious Ansei used a forbidden sword technique called the Pankrata sword, a sword technique that was capable of splitting atoms. Yeah, that's right, a fucking nuke sword. And while it's not officially canon but written by an ex-Bethesda writer named Michael Kirkbride, Cyrus the Redguard, one of the greatest Redguards, even threatened Vivek, the god king of Morrowind, with the Pankrata sword. I could go on about the warrior waves and the regatta that came to Tamriel and massacred goblins and took Hammerfell for themselves as well, but I think you get the point. Swordsmanship is imbued in the very essence of the Redguards, using an interesting blend of Arabian and Japanese themes in the process. Not only that, but the culture and politics in Hammerfell is also really cool as well. You may know of Skyrim's civil war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials. Well, the Redguards have two political factions that separate Hammerfell in two, with the Crowns, who are similar to the Stormcloaks and desire to be isolationist and preserve Yokudan tradition, and the Forebears, who are similar to the Empire because they have a more cosmopolitan view of the world and embrace Imperial customs and religion. This has led to many conflicts, war, and intrigue between the two factions, especially in the time of Tiber Septim going around conquering everything in sight. Even with the fractured politics, the Redguards are still extremely powerful and were even able to repel the Thalmor all by themselves after the Great War. And everyone loves to hate the Thalmor, so that's a big big plus. The Redguards also have a very unique religion that has some similarities to the Imperial pantheon, but is by and large its own separate thing, including gods like Satakal, the serpent god, who will consume the current world and give birth to a new one, and has many similarities to Alduin, believe it or not. There is also Morwa, the goddess of love, who has many arms so that she can grab more husbands, which is really funny, and many other gods with unique stories and symbolisms. And by Boethia, at some point I'm gonna need to dedicate an entire video towards the Redguard pantheon because it is really cool. I think my only critique I have with the Redguards is how in ESO they are sort of portrayed as being cowardly, being too terrified to fight the raised remains of their ancestors, even though necromancers already raised and disrespected their bodies and forced them to wreak havoc on the Alakir desert. It's one of the weaker aspects of Elder Scrolls Online, if I'm being honest, because in my eyes, not putting down the raised remains of one's ancestors is even more dishonorable and quite pathetic, and I feel the Redguards would devote themselves to slaughtering the undead, then running away from them and begging a group of outcasts called the Ashaba to take care of the undead for them. I desperately want to put the Redguards in 3rd place or even 2nd place depending on my mood, but with ESO's weak showcase of them and no mainline game expanding on them yet, 4th place is the best I can do, but here's hoping the Elder Scrolls 6 can put my favorite swordsmen in 2nd place. Clawing into 3rd place are the Khajiit, the cat folk of elsewhere who are famous for their warriors, thieves, and especially skooma. The Khajiit are without a doubt the most unique race in the Elder Scrolls, from their culture to their religion to even their firstocks or variations of Khajiit. That's right, for those that don't know, the Khajiit we see in Skyrim are just one out of 17 different firstocks, ranging from the Cathay we see in Skyrim and Oblivion to the Alfiq, who resemble house cats and can talk, wear clothes, and cast magic, to the Pamar Rat, who are basically giant Khajiit that tower over the rest, and also the Sench, who are basically 4-legged Khajiit who can be ridden on like horses and are also capable of talking and casting magic. And there are still so many other types of Khajiit. The Khajiit are well known for their culture, which produces many warriors, martial artists, and thieves. See, the Khajiit are obsessed with unarmed combat and martial arts, which makes sense since they have sharp claws, so they might as well use them. The Khajiit refer to their martial art practices as claw dances, and there are many different styles that the Khajiit practice, like the Whispering Claw fighting style best used for assassins, to the Desert Rain style best suited for warriors that use the blade. The Khajiit also don't have the same views on possessions as others and often take or borrow what they need from others, which has led to many viewing them as, well, thieves. Which is based and does make sense since the Khajiit do celebrate their sleekness and speed and have gods like Bandar the bandit god, and Rajin, who was the greatest thief to ever exist and stole a tattoo from an imperial empress named Kintyra, and also made love to the Daedric prince Mafala and afterwards stole the ring of Khajiit from her and the ebony blade as well. Speaking of gods, the Khajiiti pantheon is one of the most unique in the Elder Scrolls, mostly because for every Imperial, Divine, and Daedric prince that exists, there is a Khajiiti interpretation of them with a name more fitting for the Khajiit, with Akatosh being Alukosh or Malakath being Orca. The Khajiit also have their own gods and spirits like Rajin and Bandar, as already mentioned, but others like Kunzari, an incredible Khajiiti hero that achieved apotheosis and is my personal favorite, or Riddlethar, who is less of a deity and more a set of guidelines that manifest themselves in various Khajiit to serve them in times of great need. Khajiit are also very closely associated with the twin moons that we see at night. You may know them as Masser and Secunda, but the Khajiit know them as Joan and Jode and worship them, especially since the moons dictate what firstock a Khajiit will become, meaning the moons are imperative to their entire way of life. And let us not forget about moon sugar, a crystal powder that the Khajiit covet more than anything. Moon sugar is an addictive substance, however the Khajiit have a natural resistance to it since they use it in everything from spices for food to a source of holy communion with the moons. Moon sugar is also used to make a highly addictive and illegal drug called skooma, which can be drank from a bottle or smoked through a pipe. While there are some Khajiit that use skooma, it is vilified by the many as an evil substance, and they refer to Sheogorath or Sheogorath as the skooma cat because of how it causes madness and ruins lives. Fun fact, you know how the Nords have a very close history with the dragons and fighting the dragons? Well, the Khajiit actually have a very similar history, with Kunzari being the one who imprisoned many dragons within the Hall of Colossus, and the Khajiit were as notable for slaying dragons as the ancient Nords. I also absolutely adore the music, architecture, and armor of the Khajiit as well, and while many shit on ESO, and I admit it has made a few missteps, the game expanded on Khajiit culture in the best possible way, and without the Elsewhere expansions, the Khajiit would have probably landed somewhere in the bottom category. The Khajiit are without a doubt my favorite beast race in the Elder Scrolls, and playing one works super well if you want to play the role of an outsider hero. Given how foreign the Khajiit are, but still have a slight connection to other provinces and the stories of the games in some shape or form. Shouting into second place are the Nords, the axe-wielding barbarians that live in the cold and harsh land of Skyrim. I think everyone knew the Nords were going to be here given the fact that they have an extensive and interesting amount of lore, and the game Skyrim exists, a game I'm sure we have all played much more than the others. One of the things I find the most fascinating about the Nords is their pantheon and religion surrounding totems and animals, and also that many aspects of the Imperial pantheon come from the Nords. For example, Kinnereth is referred to as kine by the Nords and is seen as a hawk, and Lorcan is referred to as shore and is seen as a fox. And the most interesting of all is Akatosh, who the old Nords referred to as Alduin. Yeah, that's right, that Alduin. Some say that Alduin is just the firstborn of Akatosh, but I am 100% convinced he is actually a split personality of Akatosh, something I will make a video on at some point in time because there's actually a lot of lore that suggests this. And what I especially love about the Nordic pantheon are all the folk tales involved as well, like Hermaeus Mora, who is Herma Mora in the Nordic pantheon, attempting to trick Ysgramor into becoming an elf. But the fox Shore saves Ysgramor before it's too late. And speaking of Ysgramor, what is not to love about him and his 500 companions fleeing Atmora and settling in Skyrim and establishing Sarthal? And after the infamous Night of Tears, where the Snow Elves, or Falmer, slaughtered all the Atmorans, the progenitors to the Nords in Sarthal, except for Ysgramor and his 2 sons, who survived the onslaught and fled to Atmora only to return to Skyrim with the infamous 500 companions and eradicated the Snow Elves. But Ysgramor and the rest weren't done yet, as they waged wars on the giants and slaughtered thousands of them, with Ysgramor killing so many frost giants that he was covered in their blue blood, which is why many Nords favor blue war paint and colors. You may also know of the voice, or the Thume, being heavily prevalent in the game of Skyrim, and it is a really cool aspect of Nord lore as well. How Nords with the voice required no siege engines and would band together with their combined shouts to blow open the doors and letting their axemen rush into the city they were attempting to conquer. The Nords learned to use the voice when Paarthurnax taught them, and many Nords rebelled against the dragon overlords they had using the Thume and eventually won. Which is insane when you realize that the Nords used to worship them like gods, and that they are immortal beings that cannot be killed by normal men. Only only those who are dragonborn. Now, many view the Nords as just barbarians that swing axes, wear animal pelts, and are constantly drunk from mead, and all that is true, but there is a more mystical and magical side to the Nords. See, Nords who practice magic are known as clever men, and they used to be highly respected in Skyrim, especially by the ancient ones like Ysgramor. Even though many modern Nords disregard the practice of magic, and clever men don't really exist anymore beyond court wizards, which is a darn shame. This is why the College of Winterhold exists in the first place, created by the greatest clever man known as Shalador, a mage that did incredible things like steal the secrets of life from Akatosh, fight off hordes of Dwemer by himself, and built the College of Winterhold itself with but a whisper. My only issue with the Nords is how in Skyrim, a lot of their Nordic pantheon is barely even mentioned, with the exception of one old dude in a shack. All the Nords in Skyrim worship the Imperial 9 divines instead of their way cooler Nordic pantheon, which I find to be a crying shame. And is honestly the only reason why I'm not super sympathetic towards the Stormcloaks, because why should I care if you can't worship your Imperial god Talos when you abandoned your cooler gods? But excluding that, unlike Oblivion, I do feel that Skyrim still remained true to the Nords in many ways, even if they neglected aspects of them that should have been expanded on further. I love Skyrim and Nordic culture, and also how intrinsically tied they are to the rest of Tamriel, and who doesn't love a big hairy Viking in fantasy? But now, I think it is time for me to move on to my favorite race in the entire Elder Scrolls series. The ones with the best world building, the best writing, and the best lore, and honestly, it's not even close. You probably expected this given my channel theme, but dominating first place are the Dark Elves, or Dunmer, that live in the incredible Ashen province of Morrowind. The Dunmer are one of the most in-depth races with the most unique culture, aesthetics, and lore that outdoes every other race in the Elder Scrolls. Seriously, you think the Nords have complex politics with their little civil war? The Dunmer have 5 great houses that each rule parts of Morrowind, 1 rogue house, a religious temple dedicated to worshipping 3 living gods called the Tribunal, tribals that reject the Tribunal, and a bunch of other smaller factions. The great houses and their politics are my personal favorite part of Morrowind, and each have a characteristic that can define a playthrough. House Redoran is for warriors, House Hlaalu is for thieves and merchants, House Drez are for slavers and farmers, House Indoril are for priests and paladins, and the incredibly sexy House Telvanni are for mages and wizards with no morality whatsoever and will do whatever they want, all in an effort to grow their power and mushroom towers. On top of the interesting great houses and their power struggles with each other, there's also the Dunmer Pantheon, which includes the 3 living gods, Almalexia, Sothisil, and Vivek, each with incredibly in-depth lore, and they all deserve their own separate videos to explain it all. This tribunal also spawned the 36 Lessons of Vivek, which is an incredibly complex series of books that, once deciphered, actually tells a very tragic story involving a character known as Indoril Merivar, who was murdered by the Tribunal and stole a power known as the Heart of Lorcan so they could become gods in the first place. The Dark Elves also openly worship Daedric princes as well, like Azura, Mephala, and my personal favorite, Boethia. These Daedra serve as harsh teachers that taught the Dunmer various ways to survive and thrive in the Ashlands. The Dunmer also demonize 4 Daedric princes that they refer to as the House of Troubles, which includes Molag Bal, Mehrunes Dagon, Malakath, and Sheogorath. These Daedra exist to test the faith and resolve of the Dunmer people. The Dunmer are also awesome because, unlike the other races who use metals and leather for armor, Dark Elves will use bone, insects, and crabfish called dreg for their armor, which leads to some of the most unique designs in all of fantasy in my opinion. I mean, look at this chitin armor from Skyrim. The Dunmer are also one of the most morally ambiguous races out of all the rest because of the fact that they practice slavery, and have enslaved pretty much every race on Tamriel, even themselves on certain occasions. Now, slavery is bad, but I love its inclusion in Morrowind because it actually motivates you, the player, to do something about it. Either continue the cycle of slavery and play an evil character, or try and free as many slaves as you can and work with the Twin Lamps, yet another minor faction in Morrowind. The Dunmer being morally ambiguous also makes them the best because it's just so real and dark and leads to a lot of intricate and complex storytelling that other races just don't have. They also have the best origin story in the Elder Scrolls because there are so many world-shattering events that led to it. The Dunmer were once known as the Chimer, a group that split from the High Elves of Somerset due to worshipping the Daedra instead of the Aedra, and refused to whine about how Lorkhan tricked the gods into making Nirn and stripped the elves of their divinity, seeing Nirn instead as a testing grounds. A prophet named Veloth led them to Morrowind, which was called Resdayn then, and settled there, occasionally warring with the Dwemer and occasionally making peace with them. During this time, the Dunmer would repeatedly kick the Nords' asses every time they tried to invade Morrowind, which happened big time during the Battle of Red Mountain. This battle was the climactic conclusion to the War of the First Council, which is a war where the Chimer, under the leadership of Indoril Nerevar, fought off the Dwemer, the Nords, the Orcs, and even House Dagoth. Outnumbered and against all odds, the Chimer won, but Azura turned their golden skin to ash due to the Tribunal's betrayal against Nerevar Indoril, which led to the Chimer becoming the Dunmer. I could go on and on about the Dunmer, especially since I have barely cracked the surface with their lore, but you want to know why I love the Dunmer the most? Because they fit every single archetype you could ever think of. Sure, you could have an orc wizard or an Argonian vampire or even a high elf barbarian and even make a cool story around them, but as stated previously, the Dunmer have a faction for literally every single playstyle imaginable. You want to be a warrior? House Redoran and Indoril will arm you up. You want to play a thief or assassin? House Hlaalu and the Morag Tong will sneak right on by. Want to be a wizard and grow your own mushroom tower? House Telvanni will give you enough chores to make it possible. Want to be a tribal barbarian? The nomadic Ashlanders have seen it all. Vampires? Morrowind has 3 vampire clans known as the Onde, Burn, and Quora clans, each devoted to a specific archetype just like the Great Houses. Maybe you want to make a profit by being a brute or a thug. Well, the Kimona Tong and House Drez will extort the fuck out of you and enslave you in the process. Or maybe you truly love the Tribunal and want to devote yourself to one of the living gods of Morrowind. Well, on top of the Tribunal Temple, you have the Buoyant Armigers who serve Vivec, the Clockwork Apostles who serve Sotha Sil, and the Hands of Almalexia. And you want to know the crazy part? There is probably a faction or two that I'm currently blanking on and forgot because there are so fucking many of them, and it's incredible. The best part of the Dunmer, unlike future games, Bethesda did not dumb down their lore representation in Morrowind, and what we hear about in lore is what we get in-game. With some minor exceptions due to engine limitations for a 2002 game and whatnot. If you hate the Dunmer or genuinely think they don't deserve first place, you have either never played Morrowind or failed to understand the story of the Dark Elves for whatever reason. The Dark Elves will always be the greatest, coolest, and most based race in the Elder Scrolls series, and it's not even close, and no other race will ever replace them. And that's all I wrote, a video where I ranked every single race in the Elder Scrolls by lore and a little bit of just vibes. This is obviously a very subjective take, and not a single person is going to agree with me on everything I said, especially about the Bosmer, I wager. But my opinion is just that, my opinion. It ain't gonna hurt ya. I love the Elder Scrolls for a reason, and so I don't actually hate any of the races and their lore, but if I had to rank them, this is it. At least right now. It could completely change in a year or two for all I know. Maybe I will get hit in the head with a hammer and believe the Bosmer and Bretons are the best. And there is so much lore surrounding these races that there was no way I could cover every aspect of them without this video being 2 hours long. But maybe I will actually make lore videos dedicated to each of the Elder Scrolls races to help people with their characters and builds. This is also a very interesting video for me because I have tried to make this video on about 4 separate occasions. But I could never bring myself to do it and always found a different topic to cover, but I'm glad I finally got around to it. Especially since talking about the races of the Elder Scrolls is so lucrative. You know who else gives me lucrative opportunities? My channel members, and they are Mirak, the Proud Prince, JJ Ensid, Milani Stilla, Carson Friday, Dalton Rupert, Cosmo, Jorinish Evento, Serene Molly, Doc Smoothie, Shinigami James, Broken Happy, Winter Raven, Blood of Cheese, Vivid Void, Argentis, Metal Health, Sovdark, Gillernt, Grud, Ranger Squad, Luxie, Abdullah the Goat, Caden, Kirill Gaming, Flexi, Grabowski, Bane Hellborn, Katie Harper, The Ember Raven, Cat Lassie, Jorinaris Targaryen, Awea Ann, Elia J, Drink Tea With Me, Tonic, 24 Seconds, The Cold Storm, Foodening, Blankfall, and Love Bite a Possum. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
I suppose you want to be asked nicely. Very well. Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.